CyberShow. I'm Cheri Sigmon, your host, cybersecurity authority, entrepreneur, and consultant. Tonight on our behind the scenes episode, we are having a special guest, Marion Williams. Hi, Marion.
Hey, how's it going?
Going great. It's enterprise architecture specialist, enterprise architect, whom I served with at the Pentagon back in the day, and we've been friends ever since. And tonight we're going to talk about things along the lines of business, not just cybersecurity for business, but business models, how technology can influence the future of potential business models, business opportunities, how you evaluate business opportunities in terms of time management, cost investment, risk management, what's going on in your life, that sort of thing. So we were just having a conversation before I started the recording. Before I started the recording, we were having a conversation about something I was looking at potentially getting involved in, and Marion were sharing some feedback with me. So I wanted to pay that forward, and in a generic way, in a non-specific way, talking about which specific opportunity I was evaluating. I'm going to turn it over to Marion to talk about business in general and his advice to anyone who's thinking of starting a business or expanding a business or otherwise doing any sort of strategic alliance or a joint venture with a partner. So Marion, would you like to speak to that, please, sir?
Sure. Well, what we were saying before was anything you look at when you're trying to evaluate a business or you're looking at trying to expand your current offerings, or you're trying to look at doing something. Maybe you're trying to incorporate a new technology into how you do business. All those things require time, capability, and resources. And so if you're going to make those things work, you have to really make an effort to evaluate, do I have the time and effort to be able to execute on the capabilities, or can I get those in the people in my team or my network? So yes, there's some great opportunities out there, particularly because right now, if you look at what's happening in the world, COVID-19 has changed the game. There's lots of new things. Business models have had to change. More things are moving online. Well, there's a lot of opportunity, not just from a perspective of cyber, but how you design your processes, how you create value for your customers. All of those things happen as a function of how are you creating value, and then how are you getting compensated for it. Mm-hmm. So you think about, we were talking, I think in a previous episode, how McDonald's has the ability now to go through the app, and you actually can order a meal and then pick it up in the drive-thru. You can order it, pay for it on the app, and then go through and pick up. And so they've got that. They've got Uber Eats. There's other kinds of services where they'll pick up the food for you and deliver it for a fee. All of these are things that, given 10 years ago, weren't even capabilities. They weren't even thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. So how does that relate to, well, okay, now we're in this new environment, and the big thing now is 5G. Well, how you deal with 5G, whether you're talking about being a consumer, whether you're talking about being a person who's looking at trying to expand a business, or you're looking at buying a new business, all of those are activities that require you to look at the technology, but not so much look at, okay, getting down to looking at the routers and switches and the more technical aspects, right? The components. You have to really be thinking about what does that mean for you? And what I mean, what does that mean? It's like, well, okay, 5G is going to have all these new capabilities. So bandwidth is not going to be an issue. So what would you think of, and you have to think out of the box, what would you think of doing if internet bandwidth wasn't an option?
Oh, how would you operate? There's so many opportunities.
How would you operate? If you think about what business is really the ability of one person or multiple people to satisfy a need. Well, as you start to, and this has been the same throughout history, as you start to change the technology and you start to look at different things that are available, think about something like the Sears catalog, right? The Sears catalog was around in the 1800s. It's been around. It's the longest serving catalog in the country, right? Maybe the world. Well, think about this. What happens when you add the telephone to that? Now, instead of filling out a form and then sending it in with the money, now you have the ability to make a phone call. So now there's a whole group of people who are now employed, namely the call center folks, who now take orders and process those things, right? So now you've got all of these things that are happening. Well, what happened initially when you had the phone was one thing, but then you had in the 80s, you had fax machines.
Well, I
So
remember those.
people were faxing things in for orders and whatnot. And then you had in 1991, the internet became available for commercial development.
Mm-hmm.
Well, initially it was brochureware, but as the technology evolved, it started to change what was actually available. How could you think about how you're going to use how are you going to use that technology to sell goods and services, right? So initially you look at what was happening, brochureware, you saw stuff or whatever, then you got the ability to say, you know what, I want to order that. So now you can actually order it and it actually goes to your house. Mm-hmm. Or you order it and an order gets sent out to UPS or United States Post Office or UPS or FedEx or DHL or whatever. All of those are all options that didn't exist because the technology hadn't existed. For USPS or DHL or any of these kind of major shippers, there had to be really a large amounts of improvements in the flow of information in our organization, and supply chains had to modernize to be able to handle all that stuff, to give you, I think UPS was the first person that gave you visibility into where was your package along its journey as it gets to you, right? All they did was they took a service that was internal so people could answer those questions, and they made it so everybody could access it. Well, all of these kind of things are things that haven't been thought of because the technology wasn't available to do it. Mm-hmm. But the business has to think about, well, how are you going to use 5G? Okay, well, let's think about something like drones. Amazon is experimenting and has been experimenting with the delivery of using drones to deliver goods and services to people, right? Well, they can now communicate with various different areas. They have the towers in the areas or whatever. They can communicate with those towers and make a whole number of different services available. Maybe you want to know where you are. So if you have a baby and you notice you're out of formula and you don't want to go to the store, or you can't go to the store because you got other things that are going on, you could actually make an order for formula, have that formula made, get it sent to your house, have a drone deliver it, and it's all paid for, and from your perspective, it's seamless. You enter the information in once, your credit card. Then after that, they are now able to bill that credit card for those payments. And if you look at what's happening now, I just saw, I got a smoothie before the show started. There's a shortage on coins, and people are asking you now pay exact cash, or
I saw that.
Or they're asking you, can you round up your change? I actually asked for my change, but you could do that. So the question becomes, well, all right, what are some other kinds of things that are there, right? What are you doing? If I was a business that took in a lot of coins and cash, I might want to invest, for example, in something like a coin counting machine that you might see in Navy Federal. They used to have a coin counting machine.
I remember Navy Federal at the Pentagon had a really handy coin counting machine we'd use every now and then.
And think about what that means. If there's a shortage of coins and coins are at a premium, and I have to do a lot of business as a result of that, what does that really mean? That means that all these coins that formerly would have been out of circulation, I can now collect and cash in as an additional revenue stream. That's a whole different way of thinking about the coins or whatever. So that's it. So you get to think about those kinds of things. If you're driving down the street and you've got a car, your car could be self-diagnosing itself. My BMW does that. It'll actually, if I need an oil change, the GPS in the car will locate the nearest BMW dealership and put it on the heads-up display. So if I want to drive in, it'll go into that, right? Well, imagine being able to do various different things. So let's say, for example, you now know all the levels in your car. You know what the tire pressure is. You know what the oil changes are. You know what the coolant fluid. You know what all of the things that need to happen are in that car. Because now you can transmit all that data. That's just a data set, right? A scaled down data set. You can transfer that at any time, and you might have, there might be a whole other opportunity for companies to say, well, okay, BMW, I'm going to have you. They're going to pay. They can say, I want to put these things up, and maybe they do a public-private partnership with the county government. So they'll say, well, we'll maintain at least part of this infrastructure for you, but you have to let us put this in. So that's another opportunity, because what the governments want more money, and they don't have to maintain that kind of thing. So maybe they say, well, all right, we need to have sensors in the ground to pick up the signals, right? So maybe you have a very specific signal that signals that this is a BMW versus a Mercedes versus a Honda. Well, as you drive over the signal, it then triggers a message that says, collect data from this and then transfer it to another station. So these are all kinds of things. If you had these things widely spread out, you could then start thinking, well, I'm now going to transmit this data. So if I'm 100, let's say I'm 50 miles out or 100 miles out and I'm on the interstate, you could then send that information to a local store. A store could then actually send you back a coupon. They could send you back other information on the car. And so you could actually integrate that into your heads-up display on your car. These are all kinds of services that are available, but no one's thought of them yet.
Yeah, it's the art of the possible. It's
right.
The way ahead. Like the earlier examples you mentioned weren't ubiquitous back then because the infrastructure and the technology weren't there to support it.
Nope.
And that was only 29 years ago. And after DARPANET and then the internet became publicly available for commercial use.
Right. And you think about what all that means. All of those are new technologies that at the end of, you always have your new adopters, right? You always have those folks who are cutting edge, bleeding edge folks.
Yep.
They're always doing stuff. Okay. When cost economies become favorable, i.e. you have on your adoption curve, if everybody's kind of in the middle, you can actually say, well, all right, the cost of, as it gets to that point, the cost per unit actually falls.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually becomes easier and easier to make your money from that. So if you think about what those things are, think about when I was in school, computers had 3.5. I'm dating myself. They had 3.5-inch floppy drives. Right?
I remember.
And when I was even younger,
when I cleaned out my home office.
And even before that, you had 5.25. When I was a kid, you had 5.25 discs, right? So
we have 5.25 discs, 3.5. Yep.
So now, the computer I'm using now to talk to you has no CD-ROM drive at all. It does not exist. Well, what does that mean? That means that now people have prioritized that over there. But what does that also mean? It means that the ability to send and receive digital information, access it, and be able to use that to create some type of value, whether how that value is defined is up to the consumer, right? Could be I want to get I want information to help me be more productive at work, or I want to have some coaching about some particular personal issue, or I want therapy, or I want to do, maybe I just want to play a game with the kids. All of these things are all valuable. Mm-hmm. And as you start to move things out, more people become comfortable with the technology.
Hold
right?
on a second. So I need to stop for a second. I'm going to get something. I'm going to pause it.
When you're ready. Ready?
So yeah, Marion, we're talking about the different disk sizes of devices like CD-ROMs and 5.25 floppy disks and the 3.5 hard disk. I'm actually using one as a coaster now. It looks like this on the backside. This is the one that I'd custom made. It wasn't for a commercial one. I used to have a contact app called the Maximizer. This was back in the day. This is probably from the late 90s, I'm thinking. and I copied it onto this little Clemson orange disc and slapped the label on it. And now, since I don't have anything that uses 5 1/4 or 3.5, or some don't even have CD-ROMs like you mentioned, I'm using it for a coaster.
But if you think about what is going on, there's always technology comes out, and initially it's expensive, and then as more people jump onto the technology, right, more people become part of that, and it gets integrated in. There are other opportunities to think about how to be truly innovative, right? So these are all kinds of things that happen. So like I said, the computer I'm using right now doesn't have a CD-ROM drive. But that's because there's so many. First, the demand for those have started to go down. And it's the same thing with cars. If you look at, I remember my first car. The first car I owned myself had a tape drive, had a tape deck.
You mean like 8-track tapes?
No, not 8-track. Not quite that old. But just it had cassette tapes.
Okay.
And I remember I worked over the summer, and I was really proud of myself. I was in college, and I was able to afford a CD player with a detachable face radio.
You were a badass then.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was my first.
Yeah,
that was expensive back then. It was like $200. I was like, oh my goodness, that was like almost a whole paycheck. So I bought that, right? Well, think about today. Think about what is happening today. What do we have now? There are cars that don't even have CD players anymore, right? What is happening? MP3 was they have that. They have the Apple, Apple devices, so you can sync your phone to there. All of these things represent evolutions, the evolution of the technology. And as those things become more and more common, they start off in high-end cars, and then they move down the chain. As you begin to move down the chain, you have other things you can do that you couldn't do before, and it becomes broadly available to a larger number of the population. I mean, I'm wearing a smartwatch, a Samsung smartwatch that I really like, and it allows me to, it tracks my sleep, it tracks my vitals, it tells me what my heart rate is. It also tracks my sleep pattern. My sleep cycles. All this kind of valuable information. It really helps me to understand if I don't feel well, I can look down here and I can see I only got 4. If I got 4 sleep cycles, I'm gonna feel groggy the next day. So I know that if I get between 5 and 6 sleep cycles, I sleep well. I also know if I go to bed between 10 and 11 and wake up about 6 o'clock in the morning, I also feel well. So these are all kinds of things that technology has assisted. This watch, this is probably the 3rd edition, the S3 of this watch. When these things came out, these probably were like $600 or $700, right? I paid maybe, and I got, there's another watch, the 4th edition, S4 is out. I like this one better. I probably paid about maybe $250 for this watch. So there are all these kinds of things, right? Well, think about what that means. If I got 5G, maybe some of the future editions of this watch will wirelessly beam this information to the doctor. Or if there's a problem, let's say, for example, I need to, let's say I hurt my foot. Okay. If I have a VR headset and the doctor has the appropriate software to watch me in real time, I could actually put that VR headset on, put on some wires to model how I look in 3-dimensional space, take a walk, and the doctor can track my individual, you can track my physiology. What is my gait looking like? How am I walking? How's my weight being distributed? These kinds of things. If you
Not
look
just basic telemedicine anymore. There's huge potential there, especially in the medical space.
Right, and the thing is, those things have gotten cheaper to the point where kids have got them on their video game systems now. The PlayStation, I want to say this is 2020, probably 2017, 2018. I was going through an airport, and no, it was 2018. I was coming back from China. I actually saw they had a demonstration of a game, PlayStation 4 game. It was underwater, and you're in it was a very rich environment. And I remember just thinking, like, I felt I was underwater. I really did. So what has been available, right, they're already coming up with uses for this. You look at pornographers are using virtual reality. They have virtual reality apps where the whole point is to simulate what they do. I mean,
there's a use case for everything, right?
There's a use case, but also people don't realize that pornographers have always used various different types of technology, and a lot of the things that we got to before we had high level bandwidth, they were the ones who were coming up with the tricks to make items load faster, right? A lot of the stuff with JavaScript that's all them. Why? Because there's a business case for that. Matter of fact, they were the people who really were first seeing the need for high-speed internet access. They were the ones who said, we have a need for this. We can use this. As it became easier to stream content to the home with their product, eventually corporate America said, we now have the costs and the benefits started to even out. And they said, well, we now have the ability to stream email. We can do all kinds of corporate apps. We can stream live video. We can do all kinds of things we couldn't do before, and we can support remote workers in any number of phenomenal new ways.
It lit up all that dark
risks. Yep. Yes, and the ability to do all of that is directly tied to what happens. There has to be a technology, and somebody has to pay the development costs, and it has to be a substantive. There has to be a reason that somebody's going to put that much money into those kind of development costs. And pornography is $1 billion industry. There's more money spent on pornography, interesting statistic, than NFL, NBA, NHL, and Major League Baseball combined. Now, think about what that means. That means that they can afford to essentially have loss leaders. They can give away free product. They can do things to play around with, some of the major things they did with A/B testing, marketing. Does this ad attract more than this ad? They did those kinds of tests. Why? Because they were trying to figure out which would get the bigger spike. And they measure that data very, very well on their servers. And they can tell you when people have started to get access and when do they get online and when is the times. What are they doing? They're applying analytics to their infrastructure. You don't think of it, but I mean, sex is a large product. It's what they see as their product, or the depiction of sex is their product, right? So all of these kinds of things exist. If you look at some of the money that they're putting into things like interfaces that where you have touch and you have taste and you have smell, they're all trying to integrate all those things. Why? They want a whole nother experience. Well, one of the things that does is, if you're getting from a neuroscience perspective, is it causes dopamine spikes in a person's mind, which means that they'll get a bigger high, so to speak. Just like drugs, heroin, sex is the only thing that gives a high anywhere near close to heroin. And heroin is actually up there as one of the highest. It's up there right with crack. Okay,
so it's so addictive. Yeah.
That's why it's so addictive, right? But the more you start adding novelty, and the more you start adding unlimited or limitless constraints on bandwidth, it means that you can now stream a lot more content. So the content is not just I see, it is I see, I smell, I touch, all these kinds of things. So if you think about it, imagine you were to wear, and I know this is actually there's articles on this in some of the journals. They actually have neoprene gloves and covers for your arms, sleeves. And what are they doing? They're actually playing around with, and they now this doesn't always start with. A lot of this stuff was a lot of DoD stuff and trying to helping wounded warriors to gain mobility, right? Well, if what you think about it is a signal, and your body responds to signals,
right?
And so you have sensors in your nervous system to respond to heat, to touch, to pressure. Well, that is essentially what you're doing when you have sex. But that's when you get to a place where you can integrate all of that data, right? You're getting into human computer interfaces, right? How you get to a place where someone can actually interact with someone and have an experience. Well, there are other industries that actually study pornography. They study them not so much because they have a similar product. They study them from the perspective of what is the best way of creating a unique customer experience. Now, these are kind of, you think, well, okay, this is kind of sick, and why you don't want to think about this, but the internet would not be what it is today unless someone was willing to invest large amounts of money and to potentially wait to see a return.
So Marion, what are your thoughts today on how to leverage technology and the internet for online courses? Because a lot of colleges and schools are the people aren't going back to school, the kids aren't going back, the students aren't being able to go because of the Rona, because of the COVID-19. So things are being delayed. Even my nephew's delayed going to Clemson for a month or so.
Well, I think the biggest thing you have to think about is this, and this actually relates to our previous conversation. Whatever you do, or however you interact with, you have a customer experience, okay? Some places that are around the country are putting lesson plans and PowerPoint, and that's all they're doing.
That's it? Wow.
Some places, yes. Other places who've invested in, more affluent areas, who've invested in all of this kind of technology, and they have relationships with tech companies, they are investing in virtual reality, augmented reality. They're investing in being able to show, just imagine 5G being able to give you every book that was in the Library of Congress in less than a minute, download less than a minute. Anything you want to study, anything you want to learn, you can learn that. So, well, one kid's reading about dinosaurs. Another kid is actually seeing four definition model of a dinosaur, and they're actually touching the bones, and they're seeing how things work in full time. They're taking these things and moving them around and seeing them from different angles. Well, because of what we know about the brain, that the second kid, the more affluent child who's being exposed to this kind of technology, is going to be able to see that technology, think about that technology, interact with it much, much earlier, and it's going to allow them to have a much more deeper, a richer experience. Because I remember, it's kind of interesting, I was in average classes, and I remember I did something, I can't remember, I was in 6th grade, and they were going on a vacation, they were going on a field trip. And so they said, well, we're not going to reward you by going on this field trip. So they had to stick me in a gifted class for a day. They were doing the same things we were doing. It's just instead of reading about it, they were doing things like they were doing actual experiments. They were actually doing hands-on stuff. They were covering the same content, but the content was so much more interesting because it was hands-on.
Active learning.
So it was active learning. Well, when you look at what happens when you do active learning, you build more and more connections in your brain. You build more, the neurons in your brain, at the end of them, they have what's called dendrites, okay? As you start to get closer and closer, right? If this is a nerve cell and this is a nerve cell, okay? You have the space in between here is called a synapse. The closer, the more well you know something, you reduce the space. It's called a synaptic cleft. You reduce the space between these two items. Well, when you do that, it means that the nerve impulse can jump from one to the other. That's actually that's a technical definition of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, neurologists actually consider, and this is very interesting, they consider learning to have taken place when there's a physical change in the brain. So when this process happens, when you study something, you learn something, this is happening, this is learning. Now, when you start building different connections over time, right? When you start as a child and you start learning ABCs and you start learning numbers and you start learning operations and words and paragraphs, and then you start learning how to put together these tools in different ways, in different configurations. What you're doing is building out your ability to reason, to think, and to learn. And all that's reflected in the brain. So as you start to have kids who are exposed to being interacting with something very, very, very deeply, they get a different picture of what's happening. But they also gain the ability to understand things at a deeper level. So I can think of, I'm an IT person, but I am so happy I took courses in biology, or psychology. All those kind of courses that they make you take to get an undergraduate degree, I'm happy I took them because I have a broader base of information. That broader base makes it much, much easier for me to learn new things because I can compare what I learned to what I'm seeing now. It means that the connections are already in the brain, which means that the brain is already bringing into new connections. It means that I might not know something today, but if I get enough time to read and I can do those kinds of things, I can build connections much faster. That was actually some of the reasons why employers wanted to take a person who had a degree in, say, psychology, and even though they may work in, they may have a person doing some sales. Doesn't necessarily mean that the information that they use is going to be directly applicable. It means that you built a neural network. It means also I can teach you other things because you have a base of knowledge to build from. And that's why it's so valuable to have those kind of experiences, right?
I think that's great, and I think we should definitely talk offline about this too, because I see a large an opportunity there in terms of remote workforce and remote distance learning, not just the way it used to be with just canned CBTs, but I think maybe the next 24 months or so, I think there's a little niche there where you're going to have something that people want more than just the basics for the online.
Well, think of this way. Think of something like, think of an issue with sexual harassment, right? HR, you have to go through these very, this kind of stuff, right? Well, imagine you're actually interacting in a 3D world with a person who that you just said something to, and this person is responding. And so now instead of seeing a video of two people, it's like, wait a minute, I said something to this person is responding to what I said. And as a result of responding to what I said, now you have a person who can come in and coach you about, well, what was wrong with that, So there's a whole different layer of learning, because a lot of times when you study something, if you just sit down with a CBT or you sit online and go through a training, yeah, you can sometimes get through it, and that's, you didn't necessarily learn a bunch of stuff. But when you interact with stuff, right? When my grandfather wanted to teach me about stocks, I was also learning information about fractions. So I'm sitting here and I asked, Granddad, why are you teaching me? Why do I have to learn this? He said, because you're reading the stock, you're reading the paper. I'm teaching you how to read the paper so that when they print the stocks, this is the 80s, by the way. He's teaching me that, okay, I need you to be able to understand the stock page.
And you were young.
And you need to know fractions.
You were very young when he taught you this.
Right. I was very young. I was like maybe 8 or 9. So, but I remember having problems with fractions, and I had just gotten a Nintendo. And so now I take it back. I wasn't 8. I was probably about maybe 11 or 12. So he said, okay, do me a favor, bring me the box. Okay, bring me the box. Look on the back of the box. He said, I don't see it. Do you have the instruction manual? Yes. Okay. Open the instruction manual. He turned back. He started looking. He was looking for technical specs. So the original Nintendo Entertainment System that came out in 1985 had on the specs page, it had 4 Motorola processors. My first stock was actually Nintendo. My second stock was Motorola. So we said, he taught me, okay, for every 1 Nintendo, there are 4 of these chips that are sold. Okay. Now, this is equal to, and then he showed me how to go through the annual reports and pull the information about how many of those Motorola chips were sold. And he said, we put that there. And then we said, well, how many Nintendos that correspond to that? And he showed me how to line that up. Mm-hmm. That's how I learned fractions. That's a whole different way of learning fractions than 1/4 is equal to. Yeah, it works, right? But the thing is, the only way it works is you get to build those more deep relationships. So yes, I did do worksheets and that kind of stuff, but it didn't click in my mind until I was like, well, I actually need to do this. So he was teaching me that. And he also was teaching me about, well, I didn't even know what the word was at the time, supply chain. Because of this is connected to this, that means that when this is sold, these are sold. That's in economics, that's complementary goods, right?
Oh my
so
gosh.
you end up learning
a lot of supply chain issues with cybersecurity. We could talk about supply chain on a whole other show.
That's a whole other show. But those are kinds of things that come up. And so when we're talking about distance learning, there's so many different ways of thinking about not just you want to convey information. There are different ways of doing that. And the more you can interact, the more you can involve people in doing stuff. I just helped a colleague today who was having a problem with Six Sigma. She works at OPM. Well, she used to work at OPM. Now she's on detail to the Pentagon. And so, they got to enter all this information in to a system. And they're like, okay, they're going to process this. And she said, I don't have any idea what to do this. And she said that she's trying to get her black belt. She's gone through one of those things. And so I said, all right, look at this in terms of what is important. How much is going through this that's one measure, right? But you're not necessarily concerned about where it starts and where it finishes, because that's throughput. But you are concerned about, you have to get the information in. That means there's probably a cost associated with every part of that process. So every time you go and request a username and password, that's probably where there's some cost for that. When the person puts their information in the system and they hit submit, there's probably another cost because there's something else that goes on where now someone has to, an investigator gets your information, they sit down or in this COVID environment, they actually talk to you online and they verify that. That's another cost. Mm-hmm. Other people do other functions. These are all costs. That's why it's so expensive. You got so many people doing various different aspects of the job. But when those things come up, you look at that, say, oh, okay. Well, I said there's ways of coming up with, if you stratify and you come up with different types of samples, you can figure out, well, all right, if you're a military person who had a very extensive career and have traveled all over the world, your investigation is going to be much more expensive than a person who is just out of college, who's been in the United States and, doesn't have any real life history yet, right? So these are all kinds of things that you do. But again, you have a person who went through and passed the exam and they have some knowledge, but I've actually gone through, I've done quite a bit of process modeling. I've done business process reengineering. I've also done some Six Sigma work. All of those things are they're not mutually exclusive, they're interdependent. But it's the thought process, and you don't get the thought process by looking at how all these things are connected.
That's why I like talking to you about business processes, business models, anything business. And since you have such perspective from an enterprise architecture, very, very overarching, broad level down to how things fit together and work together, it's always fascinating to talk to you. Hey, well, thank you for your time tonight. And do you have any closing thoughts for our audience tonight, Marion?
The big thing is everything in the COVID environment has started to change, and so things that were accurate even back in January, those things they're not accurate anymore. So whenever you're going to go and look at either buying a business or investing in a business or maybe even purchasing a stock in a company, just also be aware of how are they creating value. Some people are thriving in this environment. Some businesses are going to shut down. So the big thing is who shuts down, who stays relevant. The people who stay relevant, businesses that stay relevant, are those who really understand their business model and have been able to adapt and even augment that with other ways of doing business. And if you can think that way, you can do a lot more things in this environment than you have to. There's some people who've been laid off who, one of the things that has happened is people got laid off and now they're thinking, well, okay, we don't really need all these people to do the work that we were doing before. Why? Because we weren't forced to become lean and mean and to think through, well, how can we do this in different ways until we had to do it. And when we had to do it, we don't necessarily need to have this person. And so there's a whole different ways of doing that. And lastly, I'll give an example of McDonald's. Most people think of McDonald's is I'm going to come in, I'm going to order hamburgers or whatever I'm going to order, and then after that, I'm going to leave out, right? I'm going to get my food and leave. Well, what has happened? The value chain, at least part of it, has been disrupted. Now you've got kiosks, right? So now what do you have because of kiosks? You got a whole other labor class. Somebody needs to be able to look at the kiosk and repair the kiosk and that kind of thing. But that also means that demand for people who would do things like serve food or just, maybe instead of having 3 people on staff to handle the front, maybe you have one, and you have maybe 1 or 2, and these people you have that for the bathroom. But they're already right now, there are already models where people are thinking about, I want an entire McDonald's being automated. So these are all opportunities, right? Depending upon what your skill set is, depending upon your ability to envision changes to how things happen, but not necessarily that are there, because technology makes things available. It is human ingenuity that thinks, how can we use these technology tools in new ways? How can we create value in new ways? And that's what's going to drive success in this post-COVID-19 environment.
I love it. Hey, that's a perfect way to end. Thanks so much, Marion. Thank you for the CyberShow, folks, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Scenes with Marion Williams and Cheri Sigmon. Catch you on the next episode.
Thank you so much.